Hi guys, and welcome to another Fool of the Week. This week's Fool is former Tory MP and candidate to be leader of the party, Rory Stewart. Now, Rory shares a podcast with Alistair Campbell called The Rest is Politics, where they discuss politics. Now, a message came in, or a question came in from a member of the public asking both of the hosts, who would you vote for if the choice was between Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn? And while Alistair sort of answered the question, Rory answered it, but his response was interesting. Have a listen.
In the scenario where Labour became as unpopular as the Tories were prior to the last election, it's coming down to Corbyn versus Farage. Who would you vote for? There we are, Alistair. Go on, we're putting you on the spot here.
No, Rory, Tommy Ardley did not pose that question to me. He posed it to both of us. So, Rory, who would you? No, I would. Look, I've, despite being expelled by him, I did at one point vote for Jeremy.
Okay, you were not expelled by Jeremy Corbyn. You were expelled by the party because you broke the rules. And one of the rules was you are not to campaign for other political parties. And I believe he campaigned for the Liberal Democrats. I think this was back in 2019. Now, I disagree with this rule. In some cases where it's possible for another party to win, I don't think if you're a member of the Labour Party, it should be a situation where you're kicked out because you campaigned for another party. But that's the rules within the Labour Party, and he broke them.
Corbyn to be Prime Minister. I voted Labour.
Not a complicated question for you, no.
But I don't think that is going to happen. I don't think that is going to be the choice. But I do think, this is what's so interesting about what's going on, is that we are on the cusp, certainly, and maybe we're already in it, of becoming a kind of European-style multi-party democracy in a first-past-the-post system. So it's not impossible that somebody could end up becoming Prime Minister, and including with a majority in some scenarios, by getting a quarter of a very low turnout. So I've answered the question very directly, Mr. Stewart. Who would you vote for? Corbyn or Farage?
It's a pretty horrible choice, isn't it? But probably narrowly, I'd go with Corbyn. And not just because of his beautiful ears. Now, Alistair, on...
Oh my goodness. A horrible choice. A horrible choice. Look, this is about individuals. This is not about policies. If you want to compare the policies, that's another story. But we don't even know what Jeremy Corbyn's policies are. And when it comes to Nigel Farage and reform, we're not all that sure what their policies are. So this is basically down to personalities. Would you vote for Jeremy Corbyn or would you vote for Nigel Farage? So let's actually compare them, because I don't think it's a horrible choice. I think it's a very simple choice. On the one side, you have somebody who has marched with the most vulnerable in society. Somebody who has been on the side of asylum seekers, immigrants, the disabled, the poor, the most vulnerable in society. On the other, you have somebody being accused of inciting violence. You have a guy who has campaigned to end poverty, to end homelessness, who has raised these issues whenever he can. And on the other, you have somebody who bangs on about, well, we need to protect the richest in society. We need to make sure that they don't leave the country. You have a guy who generally spends his time with ordinary people, who truly spends his time with ordinary people, and you have another guy who likes to rub shoulders with literally the richest man in the world, and Donald Trump. So how can you even compare them? Once again, this is not about policy, this is about personality. What has Jeremy Corbyn done that has offended Rory Stewart so much that he would say it's a terrible choice? It's a very simple choice. I also said this back when Boris Johnson won, when people were saying, well, we dodged a bullet when it came to Jeremy Corbyn. And I said, if Jeremy Corbyn had been Prime Minister back in 2020, if he had won the election, do you think he would have dodged the Cobra meetings? Do you think he would have refused to listen to the experts when it came to the pandemic? Do you think he would have engaged in the type of corruption that Boris Johnson and his party were engaging in? PPE contracts for friends and donors. Do you think a Jeremy Corbyn administration would have gone down that road? Of course not. Once again, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn's biggest fan. I disagree with some of his approaches. I think he's a decent human being. I think he would have been an infinitely better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. But then, anything on the shelf behind me would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. But to compare him with Nigel frigging Farage and say the choice is difficult or it's a horrible choice either demonstrates a complete lack of understanding of politics and the difference between these two men, or you're so disconnected from the struggles of ordinary people who are afraid to spend a little bit more because they're not sure if they're going to be able to reach the end of the month, people who are relying on food banks, people who are concerned about the cost of living crisis, concerned about whether they can pay their rent or pay their bills or pay their mortgage. These are concerns that Jeremy Corbyn has taken on board. These are concerns that he has listened to from members of the public. What has Nigel Farage ever said about the cost of living crisis? When has he ever campaigned to end homelessness? Unless it's in the context of immigration. He cares about homelessness as soon as you talk about immigrants. But if you take immigrants out of the topic, out of the discussion, people like Farage don't give a frig. So it's insane to compare these two men and say it's a difficult choice. It's a very simple choice. On the one side, you have a humanitarian, and on the other, you have an absolute charlatan who's willing to pour petrol on the flames of hatred in order to gain influence to further his career, to further his goals. Once again, I have criticised Jeremy Corbyn when it came to interviewing style. I've criticised him when it came to Brexit. I've criticised him when it comes to how he runs the Labour Party and how we ran the Labour Party. But it's nothing compared to what Nigel Farage would do. And just once again, try and compare a Labour government, or not a Labour government, but a new political party running the country under Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, and an administration run by Nigel Farage. How do you think the poor, or not even the poor, how do you think the middle class would fare under that? Who do you think would be on their side? Jeremy Corbyn or Nigel Farage? If you think about the corrupt organisations within the United Kingdom, who do you think would be on their side? Nigel Farage or Jeremy Corbyn? It's insane to compare them and say it's a difficult choice. I'm sorry, I generally have a lot of respect for Rory Stewart. He's generally pretty good on these things. But on this particular topic, it's insane. It's insane how you can compare them and say, yeah, it's a bad choice, it's a difficult choice. No, it's a very simple choice. Once again, you have a humanitarian versus a charlatan. One final thing, Nigel Farage is now selling or attempting to sell football jerseys with his name on them. Do you think Jeremy Corbyn would do something like that? Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next Fool of the Week.